The champagne tasted like vinegar in my mouth. Or maybe that was just the bitterness I couldn't swallow as I stood in the corner of the grand ballroom at the Boston Harbor Hotel, watching 250 people celebrate Richard Beaumont like he'd personally argued every case that built Beaumont and Associates from the ground up. The pianist played something classical. The ice sculpture of Lady Justice holding scales slowly dripped onto the white tablecloth. I thought about how fitting that was. Even justice melts when nobody's watching. Richard stood at the podium in his custom Brioni suit, the one that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. He was 73 minutes into his speech. I'd been counting because counting was the only thing keeping me from walking straight out of this hotel and never coming back. "And I want to thank everyone who made this 25th anniversary possible," Richard said, his voice smooth as aged scotch through the microphone. "Our incredible clients, our brilliant associates, and of course, the vision that started it all." The vision. His vision, apparently. No mention of the two young lawyers who met at Suffolk County Courthouse in 1999, both of us fresh out of law school, both of us carrying student loans that would take decades to pay off. No mention of the nights we spent at the 24-hour diner on Commonwealth Avenue, drafting partnership agreements on legal pads until the sun came up. No mention of my wife Linda taking a second job as a night shift nurse so we could afford office rent that first year when we had exactly 3 clients between us. I shifted my weight. My hip ached. 25 years of standing in courtrooms, pacing in front of juries, and carrying case files up 4 flights of stairs to our first walk-up office had taken their toll on this 6 3-year-old body. Richard looked like he'd just stepped out of a spa. He'd stopped doing trial work 12 years ago, said his talents were better utilized in client development and strategic planning. The applause erupted as Richard finally wrapped up. I watched him step away from the podium, and that's when Jennifer Park, our managing partner, approached him carrying a mahogany presentation box. "Richard," she said, her voice projected just enough for the microphone to catch it. "The partners wanted to recognize your leadership with something truly exceptional." He opened it with the kind of theatrical pause you'd use before revealing a verdict. Even from where I stood, I could see the watch gleaming under the crystal chandelier. "Patek Philippe." The crowd gasped. Someone shouted $45,000. And everyone laughed like they were in on an inside joke. Richard held up his wrist, letting the watch catch the light. He hugged Jennifer. He hugged the senior partners. He posed for photos while associates lined up to admire it, each one knowing their year-end bonuses had probably funded this moment. Then Jennifer walked toward me. I straightened my tie, something small and hopeful flickering in my chest despite the last 73 minutes of erasure I'd just witnessed. 25 years. Surely there would be acknowledgement. Surely someone remembered there were 2 names on that partnership agreement we'd signed at that diner on Commonwealth Avenue. "Thomas," Jennifer said, smiling the way people smile when they're following someone else's script. "We didn't forget about you." She handed me an envelope, not a box, not even a card with any weight to it. A standard white envelope you could buy at CVS for $2. I opened it right there, next to the dessert table with Richard's laughter carrying across the room. Inside was a Barnes & Noble gift card. $35. Enough for maybe 2 hardcover books if they weren't bestsellers. There was a note, too, printed on copier paper. "Thanks for all your hard work on the cases. Best regards, the partnership." All my hard work on the cases. I had tried 127 cases in 25 years. Won 104 of them. Settlements, verdicts, appeals. I'd argued in front of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court 6 times. I'd personally brought in $40 million in fees. I'd worked through a broken ankle, through my mother's funeral, through the night Linda miscarried our second child because the client needed the brief filed by morning. And they thanked me for my hard work on the cases. I looked up. Across the room, Richard caught my eye. He raised his champagne glass toward me, the Patek Philippe, catching the light on his wrist. He smiled. Not apologetic, not guilty. A smile that said he knew exactly what message he was sending. I set the gift card on the dessert table next to the tiramisu and walked out of the Boston Harbor Hotel at exactly 9. 12 inches the evening, while 250 people celebrated a man who had spent 25 years systematically erasing me from the story of my own career. The October air hit my face as I stepped onto Rose Wharf. Boston at night. The skyline lit up. Couples walking to restaurants, lawyers heading to bars in their $1,000 suits, everyone living their normal Friday evening while mine quietly collapsed. I didn't go home. I couldn't face Linda yet. She'd been so proud tonight, had helped me pick out my tie, had kissed me goodbye with excitement in her eyes. How could I tell her that her husband, the co-founder of one of Boston's most respected litigation firms, had been reduced to a $35 gift card? Instead, I drove. I ended up at that same diner on Commonwealth Avenue, the one where Richard and I used to plan our future over coffee and pie. I sat in a booth with coffee I paid for with my own money and stared at the legal pad dispenser on the wall. That's when my phone buzzed. An email from David Chen, our corporate attorney. Subject line: Confidential merger documents. Final review. I opened it. The email was addressed to Richard. I was copied by accident. David had written, "Richard, as discussed, here are the finalized merger documents with Sterling and White. Thomas's equity percentage has been adjusted to 12%, as we discussed, reflecting his limited partnership role in recent years. The merger values the firm at $58 million. Sterling is comfortable with the 12% payout given his reduced client contact. Please confirm you want to proceed with the November 15th closing." I read it 4 times. Then I read it again. Richard was merging our firm with Sterling and White, one of the biggest corporate defense firms in New England. Our firm, the one we'd built together from nothing, and he was giving me 12%. 12% of $58 million. I pulled out my phone's calculator. $6.96 million. That sounds like a lot until you remember that I owned 50% of Beaumont and Associates on paper. According to our partnership agreement signed in 1999 at that diner booth, witnessed by a waitress named Marie, who probably didn't work there anymore, we were equal partners. 50% of $58 million was $29 million. Richard was stealing $22 million from me, and he'd made sure I knew it with that smile and that wave across a ballroom while wearing a $45,000 watch that our partners had probably been pressured into funding. I sat in that diner until 2 in the morning, reading and rereading that email. The staff started stacking chairs around me. I didn't move. Finally, I drove home. Linda was asleep. I didn't wake her. Instead, I went to my study, the converted sunroom at the back of our house that still smelled like old law books, no matter how many candles Linda burned. I pulled out the filing cabinet I hadn't opened in years. Inside were the original documents, the partnership agreement, the articles of organization, the bank statements from those early years when we survived on payment plans and promises. And there, in a folder I'd almost forgotten about, was something Richard didn't know existed. In 2003, when we were expanding rapidly and needed malpractice insurance for our growing practice, the insurance company required a lead attorney to be named on the policy, someone with trial experience and a clean record. Richard had just settled his first and only malpractice claim, a minor issue, but enough to complicate our rates. So I became the named insured, Thomas Whitmore, individually, not Beaumont and Associates. The firm paid the premiums, but legally, I held the policy. Richard had suggested this arrangement for better rates. I'd trusted him. Now I understood why he wanted it that way. Because when you merge a law firm, you need active malpractice insurance. And our current policy, the one covering $58 million in potential liability, was in my name alone. Without my signature, without my consent, that policy couldn't transfer to Sterling and White. And without malpractice insurance, there was no merger. I pulled out the insurance documents. My name, clear as day, on every page. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 25 years. I called in sick. While Richard was probably showing off his new watch to his golf buddies, I met with Catherine Morrison, a lawyer who specialized in partnership disputes. I brought every document I had. "How long before the merger closes?" Catherine asked, spreading papers across her conference table. The email said November 15th. That's 5 weeks. She nodded, her pen tapping against her coffee mug. "Here's what we know. You own 50% of the firm as per the original partnership agreement. Unless there's been a modification you signed, that stands. The fact that he's trying to close a merger without your proper consent is already a problem. Can he do it? Can he cut me out like this? Not legally. But Thomas, I have to ask, have you signed anything in recent years? Any amendments? Any restructuring documents Richard presented as routine paperwork? I thought back. There had been things. Annual agreements, tax elections, insurance renewals. Had I read them all carefully? I don't know, I admitted. Catherine's expression told me everything. We need to review every document you've signed for the past decade. If he's planning to reduce you to 12%, he's been laying groundwork. Men like Richard don't make moves like this overnight. I spent the next 3 weeks living 2 lives. During the day, I went to the office. I attended meetings. I smiled at Richard in the hallways. I even used the Barnes & Noble gift card to buy a legal dictionary, just to see if he'd notice. He didn't. But every evening, I met with Catherine. We reconstructed 25 years. Every signature, every document, every partnership meeting we'd held in restaurants because we were too busy to have formal board meetings. The picture that emerged was devastating. For the past 8 years, Richard had been systematically repositioning himself as the sole architect of our firm's success. He'd registered our firm name as a trademark, in his name only. He'd formed subsidiary LLCs for specific practice areas, registered to him personally. He'd even transferred key client relationships to entities he controlled. He's been planning this since 2016, Catherine said during one late session. This isn't opportunistic. This is calculated. How did I miss it? Because you were doing the work, she said simply. You were in courtrooms. You were winning cases. You were building the actual practice while he was building the appearance of ownership. On November 1st, Richard invited me to lunch at Legal Seafoods downtown. Just the 2 of us. Thomas, he said, cracking open a lobster claw that cost $40. I wanted to talk to you about the sterling opportunity. The merger, I said. He paused. You know about it? David accidentally copied me on his email. His jaw tightened, but he recovered smoothly. Right. Well, then you understand the situation. Great terms. Clean exit for both of us. 12% isn't an exit, Richard. It's theft. He set down his fork. Thomas, be realistic. On paper, yes, you own 50%. But what have you contributed to firm management in recent years? I've brought in every major corporate client. I've built the reputation that made this merger possible. I've won every major case that funded your client dinners. Winning cases isn't building a firm. There's a difference. He leaned forward. Look, I'm being generous with 12%. Sterling doesn't even think you're necessary to the deal. I convinced them to include you out of respect for our history. Our history. 25 years, reduced to a footnote worth 12%. No, I said. I don't approve this merger. Richard smiled, and it wasn't friendly. Thomas, you don't have approval rights. Check the amendments we signed in 2018. Either partner can authorize a merger with 60-day notice to the other. I gave you that notice at the anniversary party. Amendments we signed in 2018. The firm restructuring documents. I'd probably sign them. I signed things Richard put in front of me because I trusted him. Because you don't spend 25 years building something with someone and suspect they're robbing you blind. I'll fight it, I said. With what? Legal fees will destroy you. The merger will go through. You'll get your 12%, and that will be the end of it. He paused. Or you can accept it gracefully. Take the money. Retire. Spend time with Linda. You've earned it. I stood up, left my untouched lobster on the plate, and walked out while Richard sat there, probably already calculating how he'd spend my $22 million. I called Catherine from my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel. He has amendments that apparently give him unilateral merger authority. Says I signed them in 2018. Do you remember signing them? No. But that doesn't mean I didn't. There was a long pause. Thomas, I need to tell you something. I pulled the malpractice insurance records today. Your policy, the one in your name? What about it? It's the only active policy covering the firm's current practice. Richard let the backup policies lapse 3 years ago to cut costs. If you cancel or don't consent to transfer that policy, the firm has no coverage. My blood went cold. What does that mean? It means Sterling won't merge with an uninsured firm. The deal requires active malpractice coverage for all current and past cases. Without your signature transferring that policy, the merger dies. The policy. I'd been paying attention to partnership percentages and equity splits while sitting on the one thing that actually mattered. Can I cancel it? You can refuse to transfer it, which effectively kills the merger. But Thomas, this is our leverage. Even if his amendments hold up, even if he can legally authorize the merger, he needs that insurance policy in your name. And you're the only one who can transfer it. I looked out at the Boston skyline. All those glass towers reflecting the afternoon sun. Somewhere in one of them, Richard was probably celebrating, thinking he'd won. What do I do? I asked. We take away his ammunition. Then we show him what happens when you try to erase the person who actually won the cases that built your reputation. On November 3rd, I did 3 things. First, I formally notified Sterling and White that I did not consent to the merger and would not transfer the malpractice insurance policy. Second, I filed a lawsuit for partnership dissolution and breach of fiduciary duty. If Richard wanted to end our partnership, fine, but we'd do it properly, with proper valuation and proper division. Third, and most importantly, I sent a letter to our malpractice insurance carrier informing them that I was canceling the policy effective December 1st, unless I received written confirmation that the firm would not be sold or merged without my express written consent. Without insurance, we couldn't take new cases. Without insurance, current cases were at risk. Without insurance, Sterling and White wouldn't touch us. Richard called me at 7:15 that morning. I was having coffee at the diner, the same booth, watching my phone light up with his name. I didn't answer. He called again at 7:23, and 7:31, and 7:44. By noon, he'd called 41 times. I answered on call 4 too. Thomas, what the hell are you doing? His voice cracked. The smooth negotiator was gone. Canceling an insurance policy. I hold it individually. I'm exercising my right to terminate. You can't do this. The merger falls apart without coverage. Then I guess you have a problem. Thomas, please, be reasonable. Reasonable? From a man who tried to steal my life's work for 12%? Here's reasonable, Richard. We split everything 50-50 like the original partnership agreement says. You get 29 million, I get 29 million. We walk away clean. That's insane. I built this firm's client base. I created the relationships that made this merger possible. You stood on my trial victories and convinced yourself you were the genius, I interrupted. Without my wins, your client dinners would be meaningless. They hired us because we won. I won. I'll fight the insurance cancellation. You won't win. It's in my name, my individual policy. You can't force me to maintain it. I'll fight your lawsuit. With what money? You don't have 29 million lying around. You need this merger to close, which means you need me. Silence. I could hear him breathing, calculating, searching for an angle he'd missed. What do you want? He finally asked. What I've always deserved. Equal partnership, equal respect, equal payout. And I want you to stand in front of every lawyer in this firm and tell them the truth about who won the cases that built Beaumont and Associates. You're destroying 25 years of partnership over your ego. No, I said. You destroyed it when you decided I was disposable. I'm just making sure everyone knows what you did. He hung up. Over the next week, Richard tried everything. He sent lawyers. He sent our accountants. He even sent Jennifer Park, who apologized profusely for the gift card and said it had been Richard's idea, that she'd objected but he'd insisted. I appreciated her honesty, but I didn't budge. On November 12th, Catherine called me. Sterling pulled out. The merger's dead. Good, I said. Richard's attorney just contacted me. He wants to negotiate a settlement. Tell him I'm available tomorrow. Friday the 13th seems appropriate. We met at Catherine's office. Richard looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. The Patek Philippe was still on his wrist, but somehow it looked smaller now, less impressive. His lawyer laid out the terms. 50-50 split of everything. Firm to be dissolved and assets sold separately since the Sterling merger had collapsed. and a written acknowledgement that I had been an equal partner and had won 104 of our firm's most significant cases. "There's one more thing," I said. Richard looked up. "The watch. The $45,000 Patek Philippe. I want you to sell it and donate the money to Greater Boston Legal Services in both our names." His jaw clenched. "That's petty." "No," I said. "It's poetic. That watch represented what you thought this was about. Status. Being celebrated while someone else did the work. But the best thing we ever built was a reputation for winning cases for people who needed us. So take your trophy and turn it into something that actually helps people who can't afford lawyers like us." He stared at me for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who just realized how completely he'd lost. "You know what, Thomas? Fine. You win. This isn't about winning," I said. "This is about acknowledging the truth." We signed the dissolution papers on December 1st, 2024. The firm's assets were sold in pieces. Some clients went to other firms. Some of our associates started their own practices. Our office space was divided up. Richard and I each walked away with our equal share, $27.4 million, after legal fees, taxes, and costs. Not the 29 we'd projected, but close enough. The day the money hit my account, Linda and I sat at our kitchen table, the same one we'd bought at a yard sale in 2000 because it was all we could afford, and we just looked at each other. "What do we do now?" she asked. "What we should have done a long time ago," I said. We bought a small house on Cape Cod. Nothing extravagant, just a place where you can hear the ocean from the porch and watch the sunrise over the water. I volunteer at Greater Boston Legal Services 3 days a week, taking cases for people who remind me why I went to law school in the first place. Not for the money, for the work. Richard moved to New York. I heard he joined a boutique firm doing corporate consulting. I hope he's happy. I genuinely do, because I spent too many years being angry, and anger is a prison you build yourself. But sometimes, when I'm having coffee at that diner on Commonwealth Avenue, sitting in the same booth where this all started to unravel, I think about that anniversary party, about that gift card, about how close I came to letting someone steal not just my money, but my dignity. And I think about those phone calls. Richard called me 73 times over those 2 weeks. I held the insurance policy over his head. 73. The exact number of major cases I'd won that built our firm's reputation. I don't think he realized the symmetry, but I did. By the time he called number 73, I had already made my decision. The partnership was over. The trust was gone. You can't build a practice on betrayed promises. So I didn't answer that last call. I let it ring. And eventually, he stopped calling. That silence, that absence of his voice in my voicemail, was worth more than any watch, any merger, any amount of money could ever be, because it meant I had finally reclaimed what he tried to take. Not the money, not the firm, but the simple knowledge that I had done the work. I had won the cases. I had built something real, and no one could erase that truth. Not even a man who once drafted partnership agreements with me on legal pads at 3 a.m, dreaming of what we could build together. The snow is starting to fall early this year on Cape Cod. I watch it from my porch, coffee in hand, and I think about all those years. The early morning court appearances, the late-night trial preparations, the sacrifices Linda and I made so 2 young lawyers could chase a dream. We built something, Richard and I. That's true. But I was the one in the courtroom. I was the one who stood in front of juries and fought for verdicts. I was the foundation. And foundations don't forget their strength, their purpose, their worth. When someone tries to build their success on your victories while pretending you don't exist, that's when you remind them what happens when the foundation walks away. Everything collapses. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what needed to happen. So something better could be built in its place. Something honest, something earned, something worth more than all the Patek Philippes in the world.